Canine German Shepherd, buried in mud for days, enduring storms and scorching heat. Then a miracle happened. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. A once proud canine German Shepherd, trained to protect and serve, was left to die, buried in mud, forgotten by the world. Day after day, he endured the brutal heat of the sun, his body weak, his spirit fading. At night, storms raged, thunder shaking the ground, but he had no strength left to fight. His breaths grew shallow, his heartbeat slowed. This was how it would end. But then, something happened that no one could explain. A miracle. Stay until the end, because this story will remind you that hope can rise even from the deepest despair. The thick mud swallowed his body, pressing against his ribs with every shallow breath. His once powerful legs, trained for pursuit and rescue, were now trapped beneath layers of dirt and debris. The scorching sun burned his exposed fur, and flies swarmed around his face. His ears twitched at every distant sound, but there was no one coming. He had been left here, abandoned, forgotten. For years, Rex had served as a K-911 officer, feared by criminals and respected by his fellow officers. He had chased down fugitives, sniffed out danger, and saved lives. His loyalty had never wavered. And yet, in his final moment of service, the humans he trusted the most had betrayed him. It had happened so fast. One moment he was in the back of a patrol car, ears alert, waiting for his handler's next command. The next, he had been led deep into the woods, where no one could hear his cries. A shovel. A struggle. The weight of dirt pressing down on him. His handler, the man he had loved most in the world, had whispered only one thing before walking away. "Sorry, boy. Orders are orders." The words still echoed in his mind, though he no longer had the strength to bark, to growl, to fight. 2 days had passed. The first day, the sun had been relentless, cooking the mud around him until it hardened like concrete. His body screamed for water, his throat dry, his vision hazy. He had tried to dig himself out, his paws clawing at the ground, but exhaustion had won. By the second night, the sky opened, unleashing a brutal storm. Rain poured over him, loosening the mud but chilling his already weak body to the core. Thunder roared in the distance, and each lightning strike illuminated the horror of his own grave. He wasn't buried completely, just enough to be trapped, just enough to make him suffer. He didn't understand. Why had they done this? He had always been a good dog. Another day passed. His breathing was slower now. His once muscular body had given up, his heartbeat barely a whisper. This was it. This was how his story would end. He closed his eyes, and then a sound, a faint crunch of footsteps against the wet earth. He barely had the strength to lift his head, but his ears twitched, straining for confirmation. The footsteps stopped. A gasp. And then a voice. "Oh my God. Is that a dog?" Rex's heart jolted. Someone had found him, but was it too late? The voice was distant, muffled by the pounding of rain against the soaked earth. Rex's ears twitched, his instincts screaming at him to move, to bark, to call out for help, but his body refused to obey. Too weak, too much time lost. A pair of hurried footsteps splashed through the mud, stopping just inches away. The scent of damp earth and wet leather filled his nostrils. A human. Someone mounted you. "Oh my God." The voice trembled. It was a woman. She dropped to her knees, hands digging frantically at the mud. "Hang on, buddy. I've got you." Rex felt the pressure shift around him. The weight of the mud pressing against his ribs lightened as her hands worked feverishly, scooping, clawing, fighting to free him. He tried to move, to help, but his legs barely twitched. "Stay with me, okay?" the woman pleaded. "You're not dying today." Her words didn't make sense to him, but her tone did. Urgent, desperate, like she cared. She kept working, her breath ragged as she tore at the hardened earth trapping his body. Then she froze. A sharp intake of breath, a moment of hesitation. Rex smelled it before she even spoke. Blood. His own. "Oh no," she whispered. Her hands hovered over his hind leg, where a deep, raw wound festered beneath the mud. It had been hidden, but now that she was clearing the dirt away, the injury was glaring. Red. Infected. He should have felt pain. But he was past that now. The woman's voice softened. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Rex's ear twitched slightly. She exhaled sharply. "I can't do this alone." Then she pulled out something metal, a phone. A few beeps, then a voice on the other end. "Danny, I need help. Now." Whoever Danny was, he didn't seem to hesitate. The woman's words came in a rush. "I found a dog. A German Shepherd. Canine, I think. He's alive, but barely. He's trapped in the mud. He's hurt and—" She sucked in a breath. "I think someone did this on purpose." Rex barely processed what came next. The urgency in her voice, the way the rain soaked through her clothes as she continued to dig. Minutes passed. Then, light. The weight of the mud vanished from his body, and suddenly, air hit his damp fur. He gasped for breath, his ribs barely expanding, his body trembling violently. The woman cradled his head. "I've got you," she murmured. "You're safe now." Rex didn't believe her, not yet. His vision blurred, darkness creeping in. He had fought for days. Maybe this was the end after all. Then he heard something. An engine roaring through the storm. Headlights cutting through the night. More footsteps. More voices. Then strong hands lifted him. He wanted to fight, to resist, but exhaustion won. As his head slumped against the woman's chest, the last thing he heard was her voice. "Stay with me, boy. I won't let you go." And for the first time in days, he wanted to believe it. Rex drifted in and out of consciousness, his body weightless as strong hands carried him. The scent of mud and blood clung to his fur. But there was something else now. Warmth. He felt it beneath him, a soft fabric instead of cold, wet earth. The sensation was foreign after days of suffering in the mud. Voices, muffled, urgent. His pulse is weak. A male voice, gruff, steady. "He's dehydrated, malnourished. That wound on his leg is infected." Another voice, her voice, the woman who had found him. "But he's alive. That means we have a chance." A sharp beeping filled the air, followed by the cold press of metal against his chest. A sudden sting in his leg made his muscles twitch, but he couldn't move. He was too tired. The woman's voice softened. "He needs fluids, antibiotics, everything." A sigh from the man. "I'll do what I can, but he's been through hell." A pause. "How did you find him?" "I didn't. He found me." Rex's breathing slowed. He was still trapped in darkness, but something was different. The pain that had once been unbearable had dulled to a distant ache. The storm outside had been replaced with rhythmic humming. An engine? Where was he? The darkness threatened to pull him under again, but then a hand, soft, gentle, resting against his head. "You're going to be okay," the woman whispered. Rex felt something stir deep inside him. Instinct, memory, a human touch, a feeling he once knew. Trust. His tail twitched, just slightly. The woman gasped. "Did you see that?" "He's responsive," the man, Danny, confirmed. That's a good sign. Rex wasn't sure what it meant. All he knew was that, for the first time in days, he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, he had a reason to fight. Rex slowly regained awareness. The sensation of warmth was foreign, but the pain in his limbs was a stark reminder of the past few days. Mud, sun, storms. His body had suffered through it all. Now, something different surrounded him. Soft blankets beneath his body, steady beeping in the distance, and the faint scent of antiseptic. He wasn't outside anymore. He forced his heavy eyelids open. The world was blurry, but he saw the movement. A shadow leaning over him. Then, a voice. "You're awake!" It was her, the woman who had pulled him from his grave. Rex blinked sluggishly, his head too heavy to lift. He tried to shift his paws, but a sharp pain in his hind leg made him whimper. The wound, the infection. He wasn't free yet. The woman's face came into focus. She was close, her expression tense, but filled with relief. "You're stronger than I thought," she murmured. A door opened. Another voice entered the room. "Danny, vitals are stable, but he's not out of danger. He needs time." Rex's ears twitched. Time. Something he hadn't believed he had. Danny knelt beside the bed, inspecting Rex's bandaged leg. "We did everything we could. The infection was bad, but we caught it early enough. He's got a chance." The woman exhaled, her shoulders dropping. "That's all I need to hear." Rex studied her. Why did she care? His past had been simple. Commands, orders, action. He had served, obeyed, protected. But where were they now? The ones who trained him, who depended on him. Why had they left him to die? Danny's voice broke through his thoughts. "He's not just any German shepherd. He's canine." The woman's head snapped up. "You're sure?" Danny nodded. "See the tattoo on his ear? Police issue. That means he wasn't some stray. Someone did this to him. On purpose." The woman clenched her jaw. Why would anyone abandon a canine? Danny's expression darkened. Only one way to find out. Rex barely understood the words, but something in her voice, determined, steady, felt familiar. A memory flickered. The sound of sirens. A voice commanding him to chase. A hand ruffling his fur after a ching well done. Had that life really been his? He tried to lift his head, to prove he was still the dog he once was, but his body was too weak. The woman noticed. "Easy, big guy." For the first time, Rex let himself believe her. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe he had been saved for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, he would find the truth. Rex lay still, his breathing shallow but steady. His body was weak, but his mind was waking up. Something had changed. For days he had accepted his fate. Buried, forgotten, abandoned. But now, as he listened to the voices around him, a different instinct kicked in. Survival. The woman, his rescuer, was pacing the room, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp, demanding, familiar. It reminded him of commands given with certainty, like the orders he once followed without hesitation. Danny sat beside him, gently checking the IV attached to his leg. "She's not giving up on you," he muttered. Rex's ears twitched slightly. The woman's voice grew louder. "Are you telling me there's no record of him? A canine unit just disappears, and no one asks questions?" A pause. Frustration filled her face. That doesn't add up. She ended the call, exhaling sharply. "Something's wrong," she said to Danny. A retired canine should have records, a file, something. But there's nothing. Danny frowned. So someone erased him? The woman's jaw tightened. Or they wanted him dead. Rex blinked slowly. Dead. The pieces clicked together. He hadn't been lost. He had been erased. His breathing quickened, memories pushing through the fog. A patrol car, a voice he trusted. Orders are orders. His body tensed. He had trusted the wrong people. Danny noticed the change. He's remembering. The woman knelt beside Rex, looking into his tired eyes. They tried to bury you, she whispered. But you fought back. Rex stared at her, something stirring deep within. The woman reached out, hesitating only for a second, before gently pressing her palm against his head. You're not done fighting yet. For the first time since the darkness swallowed him, Rex believed her. Rex lay still, his breathing shallow but steady. His body was weak, but his mind was waking up. Something had changed. For days he had accepted his fate, buried, forgotten, abandoned. But now, as he listened to the voices around him, a different instinct kicked in. Survival. The woman, his rescuer, was pacing the room, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp, demanding, familiar. It reminded him of commands given with certainty, like the orders he once followed without hesitation. Danny sat beside him, gently checking the IV attached to his leg. She's not giving up on you, he muttered. Rex's ears twitched slightly. The woman's voice grew louder. Are you telling me there's no record of him? A K-9 unit just disappears, and no one asks questions? A pause. Frustration filled her face. That doesn't add up. She ended the call, exhaling sharply. Something's wrong, she said to Danny. A retired K-9 should have records, a file, something. But there's nothing. Danny frowned. So someone erased him? The woman's jaw tightened. Or they wanted him dead. Rex blinked lowly. Dead. The pieces clicked together. He hadn't been lost. He had been erased. His breathing quickened, memories pushing through the fog. A patrol car. A voice he trusted. Orders are orders. His body tensed. He had trusted the wrong people. Danny noticed the change. He's remembering. The woman knelt beside Rex, looking into his tired eyes. They tried to bury you, she whispered. But you fought back. Rex stared at her, something stirring deep within. The woman reached out, hesitating only for a second, before gently pressing her palm against his head. You're not done fighting yet. For the first time since the darkness swallowed him, Rex believed her. Rex's heartbeat had steadied, but his mind was racing. The woman's words lingered in the air. They tried to bury you, but you fought back. His entire body ached, but something deeper gnawed at him. The truth. He didn't know his own story. He didn't know why they had done this to him. He only knew one thing. He had been left to die. The woman leaned closer. I don't even know your name. Danny rubbed his chin. If someone erased his records, they didn't want him traced back to them. The woman's brows furrowed. But why? A K-9 unit isn't abandoned by accident. Rex's ears twitched at that. K-9, the word struck something inside him. He had once been strong, respected, relied on. Now, he was nothing but a discarded shell. Not if he had anything to say about it. With great effort, he pushed against the blankets. His body trembled, muscles weak from days without food or water, but he refused to lay still. The woman gasped. Wait! But Rex forced himself up. His legs wobbled, pain shot through his side, but he stood. Danny let out a low whistle. Damn. He's got fight left in him. The woman reached out, but this time Rex didn't flinch. Her touch was gentle, her fingers resting on his battered fur. Who did this to you? She whispered. Rex didn't have the words, but his eyes burned with an answer. Whoever they were, he wasn't done with them yet. Danny tapped his phone. I might have something. I found a partial record from a missing K9 database. No full file, but... He turned the screen toward them. The woman's lips parted. Rex. Rex. The name hit him like a shockwave. It wasn't just a sound. It was his identity. It carried memories, purpose, a past. He didn't need to remember everything to know one thing for sure. He was Rex. And someone had taken everything from him. Danny's voice was grim. Says here he was part of a unit that disbanded months ago. No reports filed, no rehoming papers. Just gone. The woman's expression hardened. So they didn't retire him. Danny met her gaze. They tried to erase him. A heavy silence settled between them. Then, a decision. The woman looked at Rex, determination in her eyes. Well, she said softly, stroking his head. They failed. Rex exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, he wasn't alone. And for the first time since being buried alive, he had a reason to fight. The world outside the clinic was overwhelming. Bright headlights cut through the dark, cars zipped past, and the low hum of the city rumbled around them. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, food from nearby vendors, gasoline from passing traffic, and the sharp metallic tang of the storm that had drenched the streets hours ago. For days, Rex had been buried, suffocating beneath mud and betrayal. Now he stood, weak but alive. His paws pressed against the cold pavement, testing the unfamiliar ground. The woman, his rescuer, held the leash loosely in her hand. No force, no commands, just trust. You okay, buddy? She asked, her voice steady but gentle. Rex's ears flicked toward her. He wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. But for the first time since that night, since the darkness swallowed him whole, he didn't feel lost. He took a slow step forward, then another. Every movement burned, his muscles aching from days without food, without water. His body still carried the scars of what had been done to him, but he refused to show weakness because he was Rex, and he wasn't broken yet. Danny leaned against a small car, arms crossed as he watched. I still think this is a bad idea. The woman shot him a look. Letting them get away with this is a bad idea. Danny exhaled through his nose. Whoever did this went through a lot of trouble to make sure he disappeared. That means they're dangerous. She tightened her grip on the leash. So am I. Rex didn't know what they were planning, but he could feel it. Something was shifting. For days, his only instinct had been to survive. Now, a new instinct took its place. Justice. Danny sighed. So, what's the plan? The woman opened the passenger door, motioning for Rex to jump in. He hesitated for only a second before pushing himself up. We find out who did this to him, she said, and we make sure it never happens again. Danny got in the driver's seat. This isn't a stray dog rescue. This is exposing corruption. She glanced down at Rex, resting a hand on his head. Then let's expose it. The drive was slow. The rain starting up again in light drizzles. Rex sat stiffly, staring out the window. His body begged for rest, but his mind was too alert. The city blurred past as they reached a quieter part of town. Warehouses, dark alleys, old office buildings. It all felt familiar. Danny parked outside a chain-link fence. Beyond it, an abandoned police training facility. The woman stepped out first, and Rex followed. The pavement here smelled like his past. Gunpowder, sweat, and rubber from old tires. This had been home once. Now it was evidence. Danny unlocked the gate, glancing around. This place was shut down after the unit disbanded. The woman crouched, running her fingers over the dirt. Then why are there fresh tire tracks? Rex stepped forward, sniffing the air. His heartbeat quickened. He knew the scent, the man who had buried him. A low growl rumbled in his throat. The woman's eyes narrowed. He remembers. Danny cursed under his breath. We need to move fast. They slipped through the gate, the facility looming ahead. It was eerily silent, the only sounds coming from dripping rain and the distant hum of traffic. Rex's instincts sharpened. His ears flicked at the slightest movement, his nose working through the layers of old and new scents. Then, footsteps. Inside the building. The woman glanced at Danny. We're not alone. Danny pulled out a flashlight. Be careful. They pushed forward, stepping into the shadows. Rex's breath was steady, but his muscles keeled. He was ready. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and old memories. Rows of lockers lined the walls, some rusted shut, others left open and empty. Danny kept the flashlight low, sweeping the beam across the floor. If this is where they brought him before dumping him, there might be something left behind. The woman scanned the space. Then let's find it. Rex moved ahead, his nose pulling him toward something unseen. His paws made no sound against the concrete. He was trained for this, tracking, hunting, finding the truth. Then, a scent hit him. Fresh, wrong, familiar. His body stiffened, his ears shooting forward. A deep, threatening growl rumbled from his chest. The woman turned instantly. What is it? Rex stepped forward, his entire body focused on one door. The woman followed his gaze. The door was slightly open, a faint light spilling from inside. Danny whispered, "This is a bad idea." The woman ignored him. Slowly, she pushed the door open, and there, sitting behind a desk, was the man who had buried Rex alive, his old handler. For a moment, there was silence. Then the man sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I was wondering when you'd find me." The woman's eyes darkened. "You did this to him." The man chuckled bitterly. "You think I had a choice?" Rex didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, snarling, stopping just inches from the man's chair. His breath was hot, his teeth bared. The man flinched. Danny spoke first. "Talk, now." The man exhaled. "Orders. From higher up, the department wanted loose ends tied up. Some of us were given choices. I followed orders." The woman's fists clenched. "You left him to die." The man looked away. "I didn't think he'd survive." Rex growled again. He had survived despite him. Danny's voice was steel. "And the others? How many more?" The man hesitated. The woman pulled out her phone. "You tell us everything, or I make sure the world finds out." The man sighed. It wasn't just him. Rex's breath hitched. Not just him. The woman narrowed her eyes. "How many?" The man rubbed his temples. 7, maybe more. Silence. Then the woman's voice, calm but deadly. "We expose everything." Danny nodded. "And him?" She looked down at Rex. "That's his call." Rex stared at the man who had left him buried in the mud, the man who had made him suffer. But Rex wasn't the same dog. He wasn't weak. He wasn't broken. He wasn't erased. And the people responsible weren't walking away from this. The woman turned to Danny. "Call the cops. The good ones." Danny smirked. "On it." The man paled. "Wait." But the woman wasn't listening anymore. She knelt beside Rex, her fingers brushing his ear. "You did it," she whispered. Rex exhaled. No, they did it. And justice was just beginning.